People who only passively learn English and call it learning English have no idea what they are missing out on when they don't have conversations with people at least a few times a week. Do you ever go, I love talking to Carlos because his Spanish is perfect whenever I talk to him? Or do you say, oh, it's amazing how Hiroko can actually use a perfect third conditional sentence, thinking that you need perfect grammar or to use advanced vocabulary or idioms in every single sentence of yours to sound intelligent instead of focusing on communicating effectively, taking the risks you need to take and keep on trying until you get better at communicating and speaking English fluently and gain confidence along the way is an old-fashioned, ineffective way of looking at improving your fluency, which could cost you years of learning English in the wrong way. And I'm not saying that speaking English with good grammar isn't important. I always focused on making sure I speak with better grammar every single time I tried. But isn't it more important to know how to respond to someone when they are sharing a story with you in English instead of focusing on what preposition to use next? Or isn't it more useful to use polite language to order a coffee politely than constructing a complex sentence full of advanced words? And how does obsessing over grammar and memorizing words, never taking risks, help anyone improve aspects of their fluency, things like pronunciation, intonation, how formal the languages that they use, which are all the basis of communicating in English effectively. Years of studying English as a subject at school conditioned us to focus on grammar and to worry about mistakes we make because we were always corrected or our mistakes were pointed out in front of the whole class, and it's understandable that we don't want that to repeat again. But the first thing I always tell every single student who joins my community is the number one rule to learn English effectively is to stop studying English as a subject and live English like a lifestyle. And I hear so many struggling English students complain about how ineffective it was in school to learn English because they only studied grammar, they only focused on translation, not realizing that they do exactly the same, only consuming English like a subject as adults as well. When I was struggling with my fluency back in my late teens, my confidence in English drastically improved. I was able to learn to speak English way more naturally and express myself with a wealth of vocabulary because I could finally remember vocabulary. The moment I switched my focus from studying grammar to learn to communicate effectively. Hello, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Chubby. I'm an English fluency learning and language anxiety coach, and this is a channel for serious English learners who want to learn how to make vocabulary more memorable and how to speak English more freely, confidently and comfortably with the help of focusing on their listening and their spoken interaction. So if these are topics that you're into, you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you can get all my weekly updates, short, long form videos and everything else I share in this channel to help you improve your fluency. A safe space. This is eventually what helped me create the conditions to finally overcome my shyness back at high school, learn to communicate naturally without making too many mistakes, without hesitating, and communicate effectively in almost any situation by the time I was 20 years old. And I did this all never having left my own home country, Hungary. I created the same experience for my students and they loved it. We learned new expressions, discussed articles, shared opinions with each other. We went on trips all around the UK and people naturally improved their English without the boring studying. As social animals, from the biological point of view, if you look at the way the brain works and how the world works, we're all wired for connection, for communication, and not for perfection. Because if you look around, can you ever find any lake that's perfect? Or any tree that's perfect, or any animal that's perfect? Nature is imperfect by definition. So why do we spend so much of our energy, so much of our time waiting, overthinking, instead of accepting our own and other people's imperfections? The thought of using English in front of other people, if someone isn't used to that or hasn't had the practice or the guidance to know how to do that, can be terrifying for some people. I used to always be the one sitting at the back of the class in high school because I was so worried about making mistakes. I didn't like to expose my own insecurities whenever I was stuck because I didn't know what to say, or I could make mistakes because I didn't know the prepositions. Hungarian, my native language is a completely different language when it comes to grammar. I was prone to making a bunch of mistakes, and I didn't want to do that in front of other people. But then things started to change, like I said, when I started to focus more on communicating effectively. And there was a time back in the past when you were extremely proud of even the most basic work that came out of your hands. You were running, showing to your mom your drawings, and felt extremely proud of that. That's the kind of mindset we want to get back to, that learner mindset, owning your current level of fluency, and I'm gonna be honest, accepting it. I see this in a lot of struggling English students, their lack of willingness to accept their current level of fluency, and they think that studying more grammar, memorizing more vocabulary, or focusing on a native accent but not really trying to speak or communicate with other people is eventually going to help them improve their fluency levels. Most of them constantly compare themselves to other people's English, when in reality everyone's own level of English is a result of the choices they made in the past, which and the dangers of which I talk a lot about in a recent video I shared, and they are never actually satisfied with their English fluency, which is another topic I recently discussed here with all the dangers of perfectionism. Because I can tell you, someone who has been using English as not my native but my dominant language in the last decade, you will never ever get to the point when you will be fully satisfied with your English. And this type of mindset keeps so many people stuck because it robs them from actually enjoying having a genuine conversation with other people, where you get to discuss what you think, share your story, or connect with someone else by sharing how you feel, what you think about the world, and making a deeper connection with another human being who doesn't speak your first language. The way I started building my confidence was by switching the focus. As a perfectionist, a top of the class student, for me it was the most challenging thing to finally be seen in front of other people while I was still struggling. But when I found that safe space I always talk about, I switched from trying to speak perfectly, which I knew I would never achieve, to sucking less every single time I speak. Because every single successful English communicator I've ever worked with understands that success starts with suck for a reason. With anything we do, any new skill we're trying to learn, whether it's driving a car, working out, or speaking a foreign language, we suck at first. And that's perfectly fine. With consistent action, practicing patience towards ourselves, and paying attention to what we are learning so we can make the learning process easier for us to do, we're eventually going to get better and better and better until we master our English fluency. Mastery over perfection. Simply rewarding yourself for just showing up. Whenever you have a tiring week, all you have to do is show up and do that 20%. Maybe a 5 minute of reviewing vocabulary. And when you're full of energy because maybe you've just woken up and you've got a bunch of time on your hands, showing up could mean 120%, but it doesn't always need to be 100%. The goal of a successful English communicator is never to get satisfaction from doing something perfectly, which is simply something they will never ever achieve. And we don't even have to think about interaction or communication as this really complex skill, because at the beginning there are so many things we need to focus on, and none of that is automatic yet. Things like we want to make sure we use the right vocabulary, we want to get our points across so people understand what we are saying, we also want to make sure that we say all of this with clear pronunciation, and saying all this with good grammar, and of course making sure we communicate it effectively. But you have no idea how much kindness people will express to you just because you are trying to get your point across by communicating. When you're simply making an attempt to let them know a bit more about yourself, because they see that as an attempt, you're trying to make a deeper connection with someone else who doesn't speak your first language. To me, and this is something I always tell my students, how they should always be proud of themselves because they take action. Trying is already victory, because you're doing more than 90% of the people who will ever get to watch this video. And the number one rule for me that helped me build my fluency has always been to take tiny daily actions every single day towards your goal. And imagine someone's visiting you from another country in your country, trying to speak your first language the best way they can. You wouldn't look at their Spanish, Japanese, or Vietnamese as broken. You would look at it as a work in progress and just appreciate the fact that they did their best to communicate to you in your first language. But because you focus on what they're trying to communicate. Now, can you look at your way of communicating in English the same way? We can agree that we never know what other people think, not even if they tell us. We can't know 100%. Unless, of course, you have the power of mind reading, in which case, please let me know in the comments because I'd love to learn that really useful skill. When struggling, English students worry so much about what they're gonna say, so they either don't speak or don't take risks to improve their fluency because they are worried about whether what they would say is grammatically correct. Most people won't even notice because they are trying to do their best to understand you. And when people are frustrated that they couldn't pronounce a word correctly or part of a word well, other people will still do their best and understand you, and if they don't, they're going to ask you to repeat, which is a perfectly normal part of a lot of conversations, even in our first language. I'm breaking this whole thing down in another video in which I also talk about how successful English communicators always focus on what is one small thing I could do to get a tiny baby step closer to my fluency every single day without looking at the results. Prioritizing the small but consistent progress. When they only have 5 minutes to do something, they do it for 5 minutes. When they have 30 minutes, they do it for 30 minutes, because we know that small progress is still more than no progress. They start speaking, prioritizing their communication skills, lowering their unrealistic expectations towards themselves because they know that they would never be able to say everything without ever making mistakes. And practice communicating starting where they are. Let's say in our elementary level courses that are really based on learning English, grammar, vocabulary, listening, pronunciation, and a lot of speaking. Through communication, we start by talking about things like daily habits, making arrangements with other people, recommending restaurants, movies, simple language, but with a focus on communication, not on perfect grammar. And because we always start building up their confidence, starting with something that they can already say without overwhelming them, they have this sense of success and they get even more motivated, because we get motivation when we take action. So learning to communicate the simplest way possible, this is how I've been working with my students in the last 16 years, is all about breaking down this big task called speaking English fluently into small, actionable items, making it just 1% more challenging every single time, so you feel like you are rising up to a challenge, and then once you've accomplished it, you will have that sense of success, which will eventually fuel your motivation so you can do the next doable task. And if you'd like to see what doable tasks I'm talking about that are going to eventually improve your fluency, help you remember more vocabulary as you have conversations with people, and improve your understanding of fast English speakers, make sure you check out my free 14-day learning plan at all kinds of different levels, so you can see for yourself how much progress you could make at any level just by focusing on one small thing a few times a week. And I can't emphasize this enough. You have a choice in every single second of your life. And whenever I make choices consciously, I always think about how I want to feel about my English, about my life in the next 3 to 6 months. So how do you want to feel about your English, your fluency, your communication skills 3 to 6 months from now? Will you choose to keep getting obsessed with grammar rules, speaking perfectly, not making mistakes because you look at them as a sign of weakness, only finding out that you still feel paralyzed, terrified of making mistakes? You're repeating the same expressions because you're unwilling to take risks, or making the same mistakes when you speak English because of ineffective ways of improving your communication? Or will you choose to shift away your focus from perfection towards connection and communication? Start where you are, or keep going at your current pace of improving your fluency, communicating your thoughts at your current level, not worrying about how perfectly you're supposed to say things to sound more native, or to say things as you would say them in your first language, or that in the end of that process, and it could be 6 months or a year from now, you could be walking into any conversation knowing what to say and feeling confident about speaking English. Let me know your thoughts in the comments about about what you're going to choose to do, don't forget to download my free 14-day learning plan that's going to give you an insight into what it feels like to focus on one small doable task every single day of your learning. And there's gonna be a lot of breaks there as well, because taking breaks is just as important for us to do as making an effort. And these are snippets of, or very similar to, the materials I share with my students that help them feel way less nervous and calmer about speaking English within 1 to 2 months of working with us. And you will also get some of the tools that will help you build your fluency in the next 3 to 6 months. So the next time you have to speak English, you won't be paralyzed looking for the perfect word, as words will automatically come out of your mouth. And at that moment, you'll be looking back at the past months of working, putting in the effort every single day with pride, because you finally cracked the code. You remember what to say and can communicate clearly and effectively. Communication, after all, and never forget this, is about connection and not about perfection.